And in one sense, the problems we have now are only 140 years old, because that's when infallibility was declared. And that was the step too far altogether. From that moment on, there had to be a collapse of that system.
So how do we save the good?
How do we
save the good part?
Oh, we really have to see something of that collapse before you can. There has to be an admission that popes have got this, that or the other, they've got it wrong. And that in that system would have to go. As I say, any one of those issues could bring it about. Perhaps original sin is a much better hope than anything to do with sex, because that gets so emotional. Whereas at least we can, sit back and be a bit more objective about the story of Adam and Eve, and we could all come to agree now. It didn't happen. It's a story, and see the richness of that story. By all means, yes, that would be good, but not see it as literal fact. And if we could all admit that was wrong, therefore Trent was wrong, therefore councils and popes are not infallible, then a whole lot of good things could follow. So maybe that is the issue to develop. But it's a bit hard, possibly.
Well, it is also much bigger than the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
That issue is one that affects all of Christianity.
Yes, it affects all of Christianity. It depends. I'm not sure how far other churches have committed themselves there.
I would suspect they're even more committed, because much of the Protestant Reformation was based on that particular issue.
Yeah.
And on the definition of humans and the evil.
That comes into it in the sense that if you do say Adam and Eve is a story, it didn't happen, and death came long before that, etc., you still have to explain how evil came into the world. And that's a massive theological question that will never go away. It's a very real question. It's just that you could no longer use the sin of Adam and Eve as the explanation, because it isn't. I don't know. There's a book out just very recently by a man named a priest, Mahoney or Mani, on this whole question of evolution. But I've also seen a critique of it, which seemed to have some valid points. So maybe that dialogue has to go, and to come out more and get more people involved, and seeing that that's where maybe the internet needs to come in. But it is a big question.
So to go back to you, I think you have probably a bigger role than you think. And in a way, you're called to speak out. And I think you're doing it. How many more bishops do you think that actually agree with you without having to admit it?
There are. I could name several in Australia who would be in sympathy with a lot of what I say. Doesn't mean they'll agree with every word. The limits to what that book has been quite severely criticised as lacking in theological depth. And where are the footnotes and all this sort of stuff. Yes, I've had quite a lot of criticism. And so when you come to a question like original sin, sure, I know enough to know that Adam and Eve is a story, not a fact. But I'd be out of my depth if I started, really getting into questions of the origin of evil, and this needs professional theologians. Remember, I'm a canon lawyer. That's what I was made to study when I was young. So I have ideas about, how you could introduce collegiality, and how, the different forms it could take. And that would be my field, actually. Now I know what I was talking about. But, as I've explained to you, the Pope doesn't want collegiality, because he can never guarantee what the bishops will say.
So the movement really is run from absolutism,
Yes.
toward democracy.
Well, I'm always hesitant about the word democracy.
Could we call it something else?
Yes, participatory government, or something like that. Democracy, unfortunately, has come to mean a popular vote, and a popular vote by people who haven't necessarily spent 2 seconds thinking about the issue.
So you could have the tyranny of the majority.
So do I want people just voting on original sin? No. No, I want a much more gradated, the systems that I've worked on or thought about. I'd love to see a council. It is time for one, because there are so many issues. Not like Vatican II, where you discussed everything. No, it would be select questions. But there would be some, I think there are nearly 5,000 bishops now, and I would therefore have 10,000 other people. I'd look for people who had done a course in theology. I'd hopefully a minimum of, say, 3 years. If we couldn't get enough, then at least a minimum of 2 years. So not just anybody off the street, but people who've done studies like that. I'd work it all through computers. See, your technology. They don't need to come together in Rome this time. And in fact, they couldn't. It would be too expensive and too unwieldy to bring 15,000 people to Rome and have a council like the last one. So I'd do it all through computers. And you could. And you could, if there were to be meetings, they could be more local. The members of that council from California might get together actually and talk. But largely it would be through computers. And then I would bring in the theological societies, the biblical societies. I'd ask them, we'd determine the questions, and then I'd go to them and say, I'd want the Pope to go to them and say, well, now give us your view, and you're voting on these particular issues. And then, disseminate material through the computer, through the internet, and then have these 15,000 people vote. It can be done, but you've got to want it to do it. That's the problem. We'd have to do it in a church fashion. I don't want democracy in the sense of, we decide by a democratic vote whether we believe in God or not. That's not how I'd want to do it. And yet, Winston Churchill's comment is still true when he said that, yes, democracy is a very poor form of government. It's just that it's better than any other. And ultimately, that's true.